trying to get people to change their living habits, trying to get people to change their eating habits. It is not easy to do because you don't have to drive a specific car. There's always going to be the sticklers who, want to drive a gas guzzler from the 70s. Okay, fine. But that's an anomaly. That's not the norm.
Try taking away their bacon.
Right.
You were to ask anybody, what is the number one food that you consume today that is detrimental to a carbon footprint and enacting a larger carbon footprint? What would be the one food that most people would say they could not give up? Guarantee you bacon's number one. So when you tell people that we can no longer have pigs or we can no longer have cows or chickens.
But we can, just not in factory farms. See, that's the thing. There is a way to do this. So like, would you guys talk about, we've had somebody on before that's talked about it's not permaculture, but where the animals are grazing naturally and the crops are rotating so that the animals are working like symbiotically, right? And not what we have. And would people still be able to have their meat, and which parts of agricultural and the industry, because it isn't just the meat, it's all of it. And it's the transportation of fruits and vegetables, like it's all of it. What's the part of it that you think is what we could absolutely do something about?
Well, let me start with the challenge side, and then we can dive into like what the solution might be. So the first observation is the world population is still growing. We're about 7 billion people. We'll probably need to get to at least 10 billion people. Will happen, and we'll have to learn how to feed that larger society. So this is an industry sector that has to grow. No pun intended. And so that's the first part. The second part is we need to do this obviously in a way that reduces its footprint, which includes not only the ways in which we grow food, but also the use of land. So one of the big climate drivers is when we take forested land and cut it down to allow grazing of livestock or for growing of crops there. So how do we do this in a way that doesn't require further deforestation is the second thing. Third thing is, as countries have generally industrialized, they tend to favor more protein-rich diets. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to happen that way, but that is what has happened. And that means there's parts of the world that are maybe going to become more carbon intensive moving forward as they desire a more protein rich diet. I do worry that, we can talk about different farming practices, organic farming and all its different forms and the like. One of the challenges is how do we produce enough food to feed the world's population? And it's not clear that those types of practices, buy local and the like, which are popular here in the United States, works for the entire globe. And unlike some of the other industry sectors that we look at, take something like cement. If you take the top 12 cement companies, you're covering a large part of the cement production in the world. We have literally millions of farmers, everything from large ag to, individual, family farms. How do you get behavioral change and changes in consumption across such a vast, diffused industry? So like I said, this one is really, really tough to tackle. So Becky, how are we going to tackle it? What's the solution?
She's the problem solver. You're just full of problems.
I'm just showing the problems. She's going to solve them for us.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Thanks for teaming me up like that. How are we going to solve it? That's a loaded question. So I think, what's interesting is, to your point about differences in consumption across the world. And, we can sit here in the United States and talk about Whole Foods, access to Whole Foods, and our ability to have our own farm and chickens or buy organic, and we have access to alternative proteins. I'm a big fan of Impossible Burger.
Eat drinking food.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan, and I think there's a lot of promise on alternative proteins. But to Mike's point, even if we solve it here in the U.S., we've got bigger problems globally in solving it. And you know, I don't think people right now, unfortunately, in our country are very interested in solving other people's problems around the world. So
We're not
um,
solving the problems of the people here.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
you know,
right.
we can't
That's
fix
right.
Flint, Michigan still doesn't have clean water. So we're
Right.
obviously, we have our own problems.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a big problem, and I think, but what I'm hopeful about is if you look at, there are some examples where changing consumer choice can move the food and ag industry. If you look at antibiotics, the use of the broad application of antibiotics across herds, just to make sure that none of them get sick, instead of pinpointing the ones that do need to be treated. I think precision farming has stepped in to really help with that. And I think the biggest driver was consumer concern about broad use of antibiotics. So I think that's a good example of consumer choice can move the needle in some of these industries. If you look at alternative milks, 10 years ago, I think there was some soy options available. I used to find rice milk back in the day in some obscure aisle. 10 years later, now you see about 30% of, at least where I live, about 30% of the options are alternatives. Now you've got a zillion alternatives, and then you have to choose, you know, which one's right for you. But I mean, I think this is an industry that does probably more than any other industry respond to consumer choice. So I'm hopeful, but it is a hard one to solve.
And then really, what does that do in terms of decarbonization? You know, you might be, you know, like one thing you were just talking about, like the milk substitute. So I've never gave my kids regular milk. I think to me, it's gross unless you would nurse on a cow. We're not supposed to drink milk of another species. Like it's all kinds of gross, but we were soy, and then we were almond, and now we're oat. And apparently oat has less of an environmental impact than almond, because almond milk, it's like an excessive amount of water in places like California that have water restrictions and so on and so forth. And I feel like once you start unraveling it, it's like we can't eat anything. So ultimately it seems like the strategy is to tackle it at the production end, because people are going to be eating whatever they're like. We can only stop eating so many things.
Yeah.
I think that's, consistent with kind of our overall viewpoint, is that while behavioral change would be wonderful in any of these dimensions, right? Really hard to drive at the end of the day. And the nice thing about technological shifts is that when they occur, and when we always talk about like on the current dimensions of merit of why you might buy something, if it meets those needs, the markets can diffuse it pretty quickly then, right? And if you look over the last few decades, we've seen an acceleration at the rate at which new technologies, once they become favorable, diffuse. You think about something like smartphones, or now we're seeing like cloud computing, they diffuse pretty quickly. They don't necessarily require changes in our consumption behavior to drive that. Not to say, again, it would be wonderful to get that. It's just hard to do. Like, how do you convince Americans to stop eating beef, right? And we talk in the book about like, yeah, there's policy responses. We could create like a cow tax. I can't even imagine, you know, what the political response would be from like a congressional bill suggesting that we tax meat products.
Try that in Texas. Try that in Texas. See how that goes.
Exactly. So, you know, we definitely favor when there are technological transitions that can occur that don't require that type of kind of demand-oriented, either regulatory or just behavioral change. That would be great. But to Becky's point, I'm not sure in agriculture there is no technological, you know, silver bullet here, as we've said many times, and even less so than we've seen in some of these other sectors here. I mean, there's things like lab-grown meat that are kind of, exactly. That's the reaction of a lot of people.
I don't do Frankenfood. I do not do Frankenfood.
I've been quiet here for a while. Michael, you've heard of Memphis Meats, I assume?
Yes.
Okay. So I do think that that's probably a solution. I know a lot of people, you know, and this is not Frankenfood. That's not what this is.
Okay.
So basically it's cell recreation of the actual meat. And again, if you're going to do it, this is kind of it's akin to embryonic stem cell research. Is basically it's sort of that same. It's touching on that same area that a lot of people think this isn't right, but you know what? It's the only way that we could actually allow people to eat their fried chicken and hamburgers and not feel guilty about what they're doing to the environment if cell recreation of the actual animal is able to be done for eating. Hey, listen,
I just can't. Like you're
saying.
it's like I'm picturing like clone body snatcher
That's not what it is.
meat. I don't
That's
know.
not what it is.
I'm fascinated with clean meat. I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of, and Mike laughs at me when I get excited about it, but I think there's a lot of potential there for people that, they look at Impossible or other alternative proteins and they're like, that's not beef. That's not the real thing. I mean, this could be something that brings them along. I think what's going to be incredibly important for clean meat is how it's messaged to the general public, how it's, what it says on the packaging, and their comfort level, to go that route. But I also think that there's a lot of benefits in terms of land use, environmental benefits, carbon benefits for going that route. And I don't know if that's more weird than walking into a slaughterhouse and seeing what happens to beef now. I mean, it's all
okay. Let me be very clear. I would full on support going in that direction because it reduces our carbon footprint. It's better for the environment, all of that. I support it 100%. I think you all could everyone should have at it. Personally, not my thing. I'd rather have a black bean burger. Would rather keep my
and that's the joy of it. There can be options. I mean, I think in all of these
people having their clone meat.
But we still have about 200 to 250 million people in this country who want to eat burgers at least once a day.
In my house, they cook flesh patties regularly.
So if you're going to deal with that, I think that there is definitely ways to do it. I think that there's a lot of, there's a lot of small business, even like chic restaurants that would absolutely be willing to try it if they know that there's a market for it. I mean, look, we just had this really popular, vegan burger. I'm forgetting the name, the one that's in Davie that just opened up. There's a number of these places around here. Burger Hive. There's a number of these places where people want to eat. You can see it, just like people want to drive the electric car.
Yeah, there's definitely a demand for alternative meat products.
And Michael, as a professor, I have no doubt that you've probably communicated at length with your students. A lot of them are going vegan. Like, this is not like a fad or anything like this. They really believe in this and they're really willing to do it. If that wasn't the case, because we still have some semblance of a free market capitalist system where, the supply will be there if the demand is there. And so the fact that people actually want to eat non-meat products, they are making that a much more of a mainstream thing.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.